Alexandra Hayes transformed a simple idea, born in a small-town stationery store, into one of the most revolutionary tech startups in the United States. At 45, she commands a technological empire processing millions of daily transactions, democratizing access to financial services and fundamentally changing how ordinary people interact with digital money in their daily lives. Her entrepreneurial journey wasn't paved with inherited privileges, influential family connections, or any kind of initial socio-economic advantage. The daughter of modest stationery store owners in a small town where everyone knew everyone, Alexandra earned a full scholarship to study computer science through exceptional grades and unwavering determination. Throughout college, she juggled multiple jobs to support herself completely without family financial help, saving every penny possible to eventually found her first company at 28 using her personal savings and a bank loan, a loan that took 5 years of extreme sacrifice to fully repay. Her company's headquarters occupies 3 entire floors of a state-of-the-art corporate building in the city's major financial district, where Alexandra maintains a daily routine that religiously begins before 7 in the morning and often extends past 9 at night. Her seemingly supernatural ability to process extremely complex financial information, analyze international market trends, and make strategic decisions involving millions of dollars has become almost legendary among colleagues, competitors, and venture capitalists. However, the personal cost of this extraordinary entrepreneurial success has been considerable and often painful. 2 marriages ended amicably, but inevitably due to the absolutely relentless demands of building and maintaining a constantly exponentially growing company. Intimate relationships that couldn't survive emergency meetings during family holidays. International business trips with only a week's notice. And an obsessive professional dedication that left little emotional or temporal space to cultivate genuine and lasting intimacy. Alexandra made these choices deliberately and consciously, always prioritizing massive professional impact and social responsibility over more traditional forms of personal happiness. She considered her company a way to democratize financial opportunities for millions who had historically been excluded from the traditional banking system, and this social mission fully justified the personal sacrifices necessary to keep it growing and constantly innovating. Her luxurious penthouse apartment in an exclusive high-rise building serves more as a sophisticated extension of her corporate office than as a home in the conventional and welcoming sense of the word. 6 impeccably decorated rooms by internationally renowned professional designers, a fully equipped conference room with state-of-the-art video conferencing technology that allows simultaneous meetings with investors on different continents, and entertainment spaces specifically designed to impress business partners, important clients, and investors during the sophisticated corporate events she occasionally hosts. However, despite the emotional isolation that characterized most of her personal life, there was one person in Alexandra's life who had completely penetrated the professional barriers she carefully and deliberately erected around all aspects of her personal existence: Elena Garcia, her former mother-in-law, who remained one of the most important and influential people in her emotional world, even years after the amicable but definitive end of her marriage to Robert. Elena wasn't just a mother-in-law, politely tolerated out of social or family obligation. During the intense and formative 5 years Alexandra was married to Robert, Elena gradually transformed into a true surrogate mother, offering absolutely unconditional emotional support during the most challenging and stressful periods of building the business. When Alexandra routinely worked 18 hours a day for consecutive weeks and could barely find time for proper meals or basic rest, Elena regularly appeared with nutritious, home-cooked food and comforting conversations that literally forced Alexandra to take the necessary breaks she could never voluntarily allow herself. More important than practical support, Elena offered deep and balanced perspectives on life, priorities and relationships that perfectly complemented Alexandra's monomaniacal professional obsession. During weekly family dinners that became almost sacred events in her impossible schedules, Elena shared practical wisdom accumulated over decades on how to maintain essential humanity amidst growing success, how to build positive social impact without losing individual compassion, and how to balance legitimate personal ambition with broader community responsibility. Conversations with Elena were unique in Alexandra's life because they were completely free of professional agendas, performance expectations, or pressures related to business success. Elena treated Alexandra simply as a smart and ambitious young woman who deserved support, understanding, and maternal guidance, regardless of her successes or failures in business. When Alexandra and Robert's marriage amicably ended after 5 years, primarily due to fundamental and irreconcilable incompatibilities between the extreme demands of an exponentially growing company and the basic emotional needs of an intimate and committed relationship, Elena made a statement that touched Alexandra more deeply than any professional praise or business recognition she had ever received. True families don't fall apart because of legal documents or changes in external circumstances, Elena said with complete conviction. You remain my daughter in all aspects that truly matter, regardless of what happens between you and my son or any other situation that may arise in the future. Victoria was emotionally devastated by this display of unwavering loyalty and continued visiting Esperanza with religious regularity, especially after Robert moved permanently to Europe due to career opportunities he couldn't refuse. They developed a genuine and mutually enriching friendship, one that transcended conventional definitions of family relationships based on deep mutual respect, intellectually stimulating conversations on diverse topics, and an emotional affection that had consistently deepened and matured over the years. For the decade following the end of her marriage, these regular weekly visits became a ritual that Victoria protected more carefully than any business meeting on her impossible and constantly overloaded schedule. Regardless of how many urgent meetings unexpectedly arose, how many business crises demanded immediate attention, or how many business opportunities appeared with inflexible deadlines, she always found at least 2 sacred hours a week to sit comfortably with Esperanza, sip carefully prepared tea, and talk deeply about literally everything except business and work. Esperanza had gradually become the only person in Victoria's adult life who consistently treated her simply as an interesting, intelligent and complex woman without any connection or reference to her impressive business status, her substantial wealth, or her publicly recognized professional achievements. During these regular and protected conversations, Victoria could explore and express aspects of her personality that she rarely had the opportunity to develop or share in any other context. Genuine curiosities about art and literature, philosophical reflections on purpose and meaning, personal opinions on social and cultural changes, and even deep vulnerabilities about loneliness. Questions about her fundamental life choices, and fears about what she might be missing by prioritizing professional success over lasting personal relationships. These conversations became progressively more important to Victoria as she aged, and began to question whether the enormous sacrifices she had made to build her company had been completely worthwhile in terms of personal satisfaction and basic human happiness. Esperanza offered perspectives that no one else in her life could provide. Maternal wisdom combined with practical intelligence, empathetic understanding without judgment, and above all, a form of unconditional love that did not depend on performance or external achievements. The first worrying signs that something fundamental was changing in Esperanza's life had been extremely subtle and easily attributable to the natural aging process that everyone gradually experiences. Occasional forgetfulness of specific details of recent conversations that had happened just a few days before. Increasing difficulty finding precise words during discussions on topics she knew deeply, unconscious repetitions of stories or anecdotes she had already told during the same visit or conversation. Victoria, completely absorbed by the extraordinarily complex demands of a massive international expansion she'd been negotiating for over 8 months with partners in 4 different countries. Initially, didn't pay enough attention to these subtle but potentially significant clues. She assumed they were simply normal manifestations of aging, and that they would probably disappear with adequate rest, better nutrition, or perhaps some kind of vitamin supplement that could improve overall cognitive function. The devastating reality of the situation became completely undeniable and terrifying when Victoria received an unexpected phone call from the local police on a Tuesday afternoon, abruptly interrupting an absolutely crucial meeting with Japanese investors that had taken months to organize. The professional but compassionate voice of the officer explained that Esperanza had become completely lost returning from the local supermarket, a simple and straightforward journey she had made literally thousands of times during the 40 years she had lived in the same familiar and stable neighborhood. Esperanza was found 10 miles from home, sitting on a park bench, completely disoriented and visibly frightened, unable to remember her residential address, the names of people to contact in emergencies, or even how to explain how she had arrived at that completely unfamiliar location. The police had managed to identify her only through documents in her purse, and even then she couldn't recognize or confirm the information that was clearly printed on her own official documents. The detailed medical diagnosis that followed an extensive battery of neurological examinations, cognitive tests, and consultations with multiple specialists confirmed Victoria's worst fears. Early-onset Alzheimer's disease with a seemingly faster and more aggressive progression than typical for Esperanza's age and medical history. The city's most respected neurologists explained delicately but brutally, clearly, that she would probably have only a few years of clear and useful cognitive functionality remaining, and that constant and specialized human supervision would become absolutely necessary in a relatively near and inevitable future. Victoria reacted to the devastating diagnosis in the only way she knew, and that had worked to solve all the other complex problems she had faced during her business career. Applying massive and unlimited financial resources to the problem with the same systematic meticulousness and obsessive determination that she applied to business challenges. She immediately hired a full team of the most specialized and experienced dementia caregivers available in the region, installed comprehensive, discreet but sophisticated security and monitoring systems throughout Esperanza's home, and established an extraordinarily detailed and comprehensive care plan that included regular consultations with specialized occupational therapists, nutritionists with specific expertise in brain health and prevention of cognitive decline, and structured activities specifically designed and implemented to delay as much as possible the inevitable progress of the disease. The monthly financial investment in Esperanza's specialized care quickly reached substantial amounts, exceeding the annual gross income of many middle-class families. But Victoria considered every penny spent an absolutely essential investment in the quality of life and dignity of the only person who had served as her true family and genuine emotional support throughout her independent adult life. She hired specialized neurological nurses for 12-hour shifts, acquired medical monitoring equipment costing tens of thousands of dollars, completely transformed one of the rooms in Esperanza's house into a mini home clinic equipped with everything modern medicine could offer patients with progressive dementia, and established emergency protocols that would guarantee an immediate response to any change in her condition or needs. However, at the very same time, Esperanza's care needs were intensifying exponentially. Victoria's professional demands were also reaching levels exceeding anything she had previously experienced in her entire business career. A unique and potentially transformative opportunity for a merger with a leading global European tech startup had unexpectedly arisen, representing the concrete possibility of expanding her company globally and impacting literally billions of people in dozens of countries, but also requiring months of extraordinarily complex negotiations. Extensive legal due diligence involving multiple international jurisdictions and massive operational restructuring that would fundamentally affect all aspects of her business organization. Victoria found herself once again trapped in a familiar but now much more intense situation, painfully divided between professional responsibilities that literally could not be delegated to anyone else due to their technical complexity and strategic importance, and personal needs that demanded constant physical presence and deep emotional involvement, which she sincerely wanted to provide but simply couldn't fit into a schedule that was already operating far beyond sustainable human limits. Her regular visits to Esperanza inevitably became briefer, more spaced out, and progressively more focused on practical and administrative aspects rather than genuine emotional connection. Instead of the long and relaxed conversations that had characterized their meetings for over a decade, Victoria arrived with mental checklists of technical and administrative verifications, with the caregivers rigorously complying with all established medical protocols, with the prescribed medications being administered at the exact times and correct dosages. Did the detailed medical reports indicate progress, stabilization, or decline in her condition? Was all safety and monitoring equipment functioning perfectly without technical failures? Her conversations with Esperanza during these increasingly rushed visits often amounted to basic questions about immediate physical well-being, updates on recent changes in her medical condition, and coordination of consultations with additional specialists. Victoria had unconsciously developed an almost exclusively medical and technical approach to her interactions with Esperanza, focusing intensely on quantifiable data and measurable objective indicators instead of genuine emotional connection, comforting human presence, or acknowledgement of the complete person who still existed within the growing limitations imposed by the progressive disease. It was in this extremely challenging and emotionally complex context that Alberto Mendoza entered the lives of both women in a seemingly casual way, but one that would prove transformative for the entire extended family. At 42, Alberto was a residential cleaning and maintenance professional with over 2 decades of specific and specialized experience in properties housing elderly people or those with special needs related to physical or mental health. Alberto's particular specialization had not been chosen randomly or simply for lack of other more prestigious or financially rewarding professional options. His personal and professional trajectory had been profoundly and permanently shaped by a devastating family experience that completely transformed his perspective on care, human responsibility, and above all, the inalienable value of human dignity in situations of extreme physical and emotional vulnerability. Exactly 15 years ago, Alberto had lost his own father to Alzheimer's after 3 long and progressively more difficult years of relentless and irreversible cognitive decline, during which he had served as the primary and often sole caregiver. His mother had passed away a few years before his father's diagnosis due to cancer-related complications, leaving Alberto as literally the only person responsible for a man who gradually ceased to recognize him as a son, as a family member, as a specific individual, and finally, as a human being distinguishable from any other person who appeared in his limited and fragmented field of vision. This prolonged and emotionally devastating experience had been simultaneously the hardest thing Alberto had ever faced in his life, and also the most profound and transformative education he could have imagined receiving about patience that completely transcends normal human limits, about effective communication techniques with people whose memories and personalities are fragmenting in completely unpredictable and often terrifying ways, about practical methods for preserving personal dignity and human respect, even when behaviors become challenging, confusing, repetitive, or seemingly hostile. Most crucially, Alberto had developed through this painful experience an intimate and empathetic understanding of the specific and often unarticulated needs, not only of people living directly with dementia, but also of their family members, who inevitably face persistent guilt, increasing frustration, extreme emotional and physical exhaustion, and an overwhelming sense of powerlessness in the face of a medical condition that no amount of financial resources, medical knowledge, or personal dedication can reverse, cure, or even significantly delay. For 3 years, while caring for his father, Albert developed practical strategies and emotional approaches that worked far better than the formal techniques he'd tried to learn from books, medical websites, or well-meaning advice from professionals who had never personally experienced the daily challenges of caring for someone with progressive dementia. He learned that methods that worked one day could be completely ineffective the next, that infinite patience was literally a survival requirement, and that maintaining the dignity of the person being cared for was often more important for their emotional well-being than focusing exclusively on medical or physical needs. After the eventual and inevitable passing of his father, Albert made a conscious and deliberate decision to channel all that painful but educational experience into something constructive that could benefit others facing similar situations. He consciously specialized in working exclusively for families facing dementia-related challenges, offering not only the obvious technical services of house cleaning and home maintenance, but also a stable, understanding, and emotionally intelligent human presence that often became absolutely essential for the well-being of both the patients and their dedicated but often overwhelmed family members. The specialized agency that provided domestic services to high-income families with specific healthcare needs had recommended Albert to Victoria, with particular emphasis on his proven experience with dementia and his absolutely unquestionable reputation for reliability, complete discretion, and exceptional emotional sensitivity in delicate situations. During the detailed initial interview, which lasted over a full hour, Victoria was genuinely impressed not only by his impeccable technical qualifications and enthusiastically positive references, but primarily by his articulate and genuine understanding of the specific emotional and practical complexities of caring for someone with Alzheimer's. Albert was officially hired to work at Esperanza's house twice a week, with clearly defined responsibilities that included general cleaning and home organization, minor repairs and preventative equipment maintenance, and basic assistance during specific periods when the specialized caregivers were not present or were busy with other technical tasks. Victoria had established extremely clear protocols and specific expectations, assuming he would function primarily as an efficient and discreet technical employee who would keep the physical home safe, clean, and properly organized without creating any additional complications in an already extremely complex and emotionally delicate situation. What Victoria hadn't anticipated, and what would prove absolutely transformative for the entire family situation, was how Albert would naturally and quickly develop a genuine and mutually beneficial therapeutic connection with Esperanza that would completely transcend any conventional definition of an employer-employee relationship. During his first few days of work at the house, he meticulously and sensitively observed Esperanza's specific behavioral patterns, her individual and unique preferences, her moments of greater mental clarity versus periods of more intense confusion and disorientation, and especially her particular emotional needs that apparently weren't being adequately recognized or met by the medically trained but perhaps emotionally less sensitive or experienced professional caregivers. Through careful observation and gradual and respectful experimentation, Albert discovered that Esperanza responded particularly positively and animatedly to detailed conversations about her youth in Mexico, specific stories about family traditions she had kept alive and passed down for decades, and especially vivid memories related to the traditional cuisine she had learned directly from her own mother and grandmother during her childhood and adolescence. These targeted conversations seemed to awaken deeper and older memories that remained relatively intact and accessible even as recent memories became progressively more fragmented, confused, and completely inaccessible to her. Without asking Victoria for specific permission or making any kind of fuss about his experimental therapeutic initiatives, Albert consciously began bringing small quantities of authentic traditional Mexican ingredients during his regular visits and collaboratively cooking simple but meaningful dishes with Esperanza during periods when she demonstrated greater clarity and interest. These shared cooking activities not only awakened surprisingly and excitingly moments of mental lucidity, but also provided genuine and visible joy, and above all, a restored sense of purpose and usefulness that had almost completely disappeared from Esperanza's daily life since the diagnosis had been established and she had become progressively more dependent on external care. During the regular house cleaning and organization sessions, Albert developed a consistent pattern of maintaining continuous conversations with Esperanza exactly as if she were completely lucid and cognitively present in every aspect, invariably treating her with total respect, absolute dignity, and complete acknowledgement of her humanity, even when her responses were obviously confused, repetitive, disconnected from present reality, or seemingly unrelated to the topics being discussed. Albert had learned through his own long and painful personal experience with his father that people living with dementia often retain significant levels of emotional awareness and the ability to perceive and respond to how they are being treated by other people, even when they progressively lose specific cognitive abilities such as short-term memory, facial recognition, or the ability to process complex or abstract information. He had discovered through years of careful experimentation that being consistently treated with genuine respect, seemingly infinite patience, and unquestionable acknowledgement of their complete humanity could dramatically improve not only the overall emotional state, but even the temporary cognitive functioning of people living with Alzheimer's. Albert never spoke to Esperanza condescendingly or patronizingly. He never treated her like a child or someone with diminished mental capacity. He always addressed her with the same respect and consideration he would offer any intelligent and experienced woman, a woman who had lived a full life and contributed significantly to her family and community. Victoria rarely witnessed these transformative and therapeutic interactions. Her visits to Esperanza had become inevitably shorter and focused exclusively on checking specific practical tasks. She typically arrived with detailed mental checklists of administrative items that needed verification or updates. Were the professional caregivers rigorously adhering to all medical protocols established by the specialists? Were the prescribed medications being administered precisely at the specified times and in the exact recommended dosages? Did the latest medical reports indicate any kind of measurable progress, stabilization of the condition, or evidence of accelerated decline? Was all the sophisticated medical safety and monitoring equipment functioning perfectly without any kind of technical malfunction or operational problem? Her direct conversations with Esperanza during these increasingly rushed and focused visits often were limited to basic and practical questions about immediate physical well-being, updates on any observable changes in her medical condition since the previous visit, verification of compliance with prescribed medications and therapies, and logistical coordination of future consultations with additional specialists who might offer supplementary treatments or assessments. Victoria had unconsciously developed an almost exclusively medical and technical approach to all her interactions with Esperanza, focusing intensively and exclusively on quantifiable data, measurable objective indicators, and statistical evidence of progress or decline, instead of seeking or cultivating genuine emotional connection, comforting and reassuring human presence, or explicit acknowledgement of the complete and valuable person who still existed within the increasing limitations imposed by the inevitable progression of the neurological disease. During the months following Albert's official start working at Esperanza's home, he observed and mentally documented a worrying but extremely common behavioral pattern in Esperanza's daily routine. She consistently became more agitated, disoriented, anxious, and emotionally unstable during the afternoons, especially between approximately 3 and 6 in the afternoon. This specific phenomenon, clinically known as sundowning, is extraordinarily common in people living with dementia and represents one of the most challenging and stressful aspects of the condition for both the patients themselves and their family and professional caregivers. Instead of simply reporting this observation as an additional medical problem for the specialized caregivers to try to resolve through additional medications, modifications to existing treatment protocols, or adjustments to the structured daily routine, Albert consciously began experimenting with specific activities and targeted interactions that could potentially calm and comfort Esperanza during these particularly difficult and distressing periods for her. Through a careful process of trial and error, respectful experimentation, and sensitive observation of Esperanza's reactions to different approaches, he discovered that very gentle and relaxed walks in the backyard garden, strategically combined with targeted conversations about specific plants, favorite flowers, and gardening techniques she had practiced and perfected for decades, had an almost magical calming effect on her characteristic evening agitation. Albert began to deliberately and consistently dedicate a full hour of each of his regular visits to these carefully structured therapeutic walks, during which Esperanza frequently demonstrated moments of absolutely surprising and moving mental clarity, genuine and spontaneous joy, and even insightful observations about life, relationships, and human experience, revealing clearly that essential and profound aspects of her personality, intelligence, and accumulated wisdom remained completely intact despite the visible and measurable progression of the neurological disease. What Albert didn't know, and which would become crucial to the future development of the entire family situation, was that Victoria had installed an extremely comprehensive and sophisticated system of discrete security cameras throughout Esperanza's property, including indoor and outdoor areas, primarily as a preventative measure of protection against possible intrusions, thefts, or medical emergencies, but also as a technological way to monitor the overall well-being of her former mother-in-law during the increasingly long periods when she could not be physically present due to the absolute demands of her business responsibilities. The monitoring system was technically configured to automatically alert her to activities considered unusual by the recognition software, potential emergency situations, or behaviors that might indicate safety or health problems. But she rarely manually checked the recordings of routine activities that the system automatically classified as normal and non-problematic. During this same intense period, Victoria was simultaneously completely absorbed in the most critical and decisive phase of the international merger negotiation that had consumed almost all of her mental and emotional attention. For more than a full year, the significant time zone differences between the continents involved in the transaction meant that she was regularly participating in extremely important video conferences at 5 in the morning with European investors and partners, working intensively throughout the day on detailed financial analyses and complex legal structuring, and frequently ending her already long days with strategic calls at 10 at night, with Asian partners whose involvement was absolutely crucial to the success of the merger. She was consistently maintaining an unsustainable routine of 18 to 20 hours of work per day, 7 days a week for consecutive weeks, desperately trying to finalize all aspects of the most important, complex, and potentially transformative deal of her entire professional career. The physical and emotional stress of this schedule was extraordinary, but Victoria was determined not to let anything interfere with the successful conclusion of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that could transform her tech startup into a truly global force. Inevitably, her personal visits to Esperanza became even more sporadic, brief, and exclusively focused on administrative check-ins during this absolutely crucial phase of the business negotiation. Victoria felt a constant and intense guilt for not being able to dedicate the proper time and emotional attention she knew Esperanza deserved and needed. But she also rationally understood that successfully finalizing the merger would guarantee virtually unlimited financial resources to provide the best possible care for Esperanza during all the challenging years that were sure to come as the disease inevitably progressed. One particularly beautiful Sunday morning in mid-November, Victoria made a completely impulsive and uncharacteristic decision that would permanently and fundamentally change her perspective on care, genuine human value, and most importantly, what truly constitutes real wealth and personal satisfaction in life. She abruptly cancelled an extremely important meeting scheduled for the afternoon with venture capitalists, something that would normally be completely unthinkable and potentially disastrous for her negotiations, specifically to dedicate at least 3 full and uninterrupted hours of genuine quality time with Esperanza, something she painfully recognized she hadn't been able to do adequately for almost 2 weeks due to the absolutely relentless demands of the final phase of the merger negotiation. Victoria arrived at Esperanza's family home precisely at 10 in the morning, carefully bringing a selection of fresh and authentic ingredients to prepare together an elaborate traditional Mexican meal that they had cooked many times during happier and more relaxed years when their visits were prolonged, relaxed, and emotionally nourishing weekly events for both of them. She was genuinely eager and emotionally prepared to reconnect with Esperanza in a much more human, personal, and meaningful way than the quick and administrative practical check-ins that had unfortunately characterized their recent interactions. when she arrived at the family property and parked her car in the circular driveway, Victoria found the house completely silent and seemingly devoid of any human activity. The specialized weekend caregivers were not present, as had been previously scheduled and coordinated to give Esperanza a few precious hours of greater personal freedom and domestic normalcy. And there were no obvious or audible signs of activity within the main residence. Initially concerned about the possibility of some unreported problem or emergency, she immediately and thoroughly checked all security systems through her connected smartphone and discovered with relief that there were no active alerts, emergency notifications, or technical indications of problems of any kind related to the safety or well-being of Esperanza. It was at this precise moment of technological verification that she distinctly heard human voices coming from the direction of the property's back garden, clearly audible sounds of conversation that seemed calm, friendly, and completely normal. Curious about the origin of these voices, and still slightly apprehensive about who exactly might be present on the property during a period when she had assumed it would be completely empty except for Esperanza herself, Victoria cautiously and discreetly headed towards the sounds of conversation, mentally prepared to investigate any situation that might represent a potential risk or legitimate concern for Esperanza's safety or well-being. What she discovered when she finally rounded the corner of the house and got a clear and direct view of the back garden would not only change her understanding of Esperanza and Alberto as individuals, but fundamentally and permanently alter her perspective on what constitutes authentic care versus merely technical care, on where true human value really resides in relationships and interactions, and on the crucial difference between solving problems through financial resources versus nurturing people through genuine human presence and deep empathetic understanding. Alberto was walking very slowly and deliberately through the back garden next to Esperanza, gently but firmly holding her right arm to offer the necessary physical stability and security during the walk, but clearly and consciously allowing her to completely direct the natural pace, the specific direction, and the focus of attention of her exploration of the outdoor space. They were deeply engaged in a conversation that seemed genuinely intense, mutually interesting, and emotionally significant for both, with Esperanza gesturing animatedly with her free hand and Alberto listening with complete, focused, and obviously genuine attention. Even more impressive and moving for Victoria, who hadn't seen Esperanza demonstrate this level of engagement in literally months, was that Esperanza seemed noticeably more alert, more mentally present, more physically coordinated, and more like the intelligent and vivacious woman Victoria had known and loved before the devastating diagnosis than at any time during all the recent months of expensive treatments and specialized care. Her body posture was visibly more upright and confident, her movements were more fluid and coordinated, and most importantly, there was an unmistakable expression of genuine joy, restored purpose, and personal satisfaction on her face that had almost completely disappeared since the onset of the first neurological symptoms. Victoria remained completely still and hidden behind a large tree in the garden, discreetly observing and trying to mentally and emotionally process what she was witnessing. Alberto was clearly not simply passively supervising Esperanza or keeping her physically safe according to established protocols. He was genuinely and actively engaged with her as a complete, interesting, and valuable person, responding to her observations about the garden's specific plants with real knowledge, authentic interest, and obvious respect for her. Accumulated experience and wisdom, As Victoria watched, a growing fascination and admiration filled her. She gradually realized that Alberto had naturally, intuitively transformed a seemingly simple recreational walk into an extraordinarily sophisticated form of holistic occupational therapy and targeted cognitive stimulation. He asked specific, thoughtful questions about different plants, questions that clearly sparked Esperanza's well-preserved long-term memories. He actively encouraged her to share the detailed knowledge about gardening and horticulture she'd accumulated and applied over decades of practical experience. And most importantly, he validated, celebrated, and showed genuine appreciation for every insight, memory, or observation she could access and articulate. The conversation Victoria could partially overhear was extraordinarily rich in content, completely respectful in tone, and consistently treated Esperanza exactly as the intelligent, experienced, and wise woman she had been throughout her adult life. Alberto never spoke to her condescendingly, in a simplified or infantilizing manner. He consistently addressed her as an intellectual and social equal, actively soliciting her opinions on diverse topics, asking for specific advice on plant care, and demonstrating genuine interest and obvious respect for her accumulated wisdom and practical experience. But what most shocked and moved Victoria was realizing she was hearing Esperanza speak with a clarity of mind, coherence of thought, and verbal articulation she hadn't demonstrated during months of expensive, structured medical treatments. The regular walks in the garden with Alberto were apparently awakening and activating significant aspects of her personality and cognitive abilities. Aspects that all the sophisticated and specialized medical treatments, however expensive and technically advanced, had failed to effectively access or stimulate. In one specific transformative moment, a watershed moment that would be permanently etched in Victoria's memory, redefining her understanding of human value and authentic care, she heard Alberto say something to Esperanza that made her stop walking completely and turn to look at him directly with full attention. "Donna Esperanza," he said, his voice filled with absolute sincerity and genuine respect. "You know you're one of the wisest and most interesting women I've ever had the privilege of knowing in my entire life. Every conversation we have teaches me something important about how to live with dignity, grace, and wisdom, even when facing challenges that seem impossible to overcome." Esperanza's response was clear, articulate, and deeply touching. "Alberto, you remind me of who I always was inside. The real person who still exists, even when my mind sometimes gets confused. When other people look at me now, they see mainly a disease, a problem, a medical condition that needs to be managed. You see me and treat me as a complete and valuable person." It was in this exact moment of emotional revelation that Victoria felt warm tears uncontrollably streaming down her face. She finally understood with complete clarity what she was witnessing. She realized that Alberto had achieved something extraordinary, that all her money, all her unlimited financial resources, and all the most expensive and qualified medical specialists hadn't been able to accomplish. Consistent treatment of Esperanza, not as a patient or a complex medical problem to be managed and controlled, but as a complete, valuable and dignified human being whose contributions, perspectives, and accumulated wisdom were still precious, relevant, and deserving of recognition and celebration. Alberto continued his statement with words that penetrated directly into Victoria's heart. "You have dementia, that's true. But dementia isn't all you are, nor does it completely define your value as a person. You are still the extraordinary woman who raised wonderful children, who cooks better than any professional chef, who understands plants and life in ways I'm only beginning to learn and appreciate. The disease may be changing some specific abilities, but it hasn't changed one bit the beautiful and generous heart you've always had, nor the wisdom that comes from a life well lived. Victoria realized with overwhelming emotional impact that Alberto had achieved something she, with all her resources, education and good intentions, hadn't known how to accomplish. He had found practical and effective ways to consistently connect with essential aspects of Esperanza that remained intact and vibrant, offering her not only competent physical care and adequate medical supervision, but above all, genuine recognition, constant validation, and active celebration of her continued value as a complete and contributing person. She continued observing in respectful silence for another 15 full minutes, during which she witnessed an interaction that was simultaneously simple in its execution and profoundly therapeutic in its effects. Alberto was offering something that literally couldn't be bought with money: completely authentic human presence, unconditional and unquestionable respect, and above all, the rare and precious ability to see and celebrate possibilities, abilities, and human value, instead of focusing exclusively on limitations, deficiencies, or problems to be solved. When Alberto and Esperanza finally began to slowly and carefully return toward the main house, Victoria made a conscious decision that would define not only the development of the rest of that transformative Sunday, but her fundamental future approach to personal relationships, understanding of authentic care, and above all, her own essential life priorities. Instead of remaining hidden as a passive observer or confronting the situation defensively or territorially, she deliberately chose to reveal her presence in a way that honored and completely validated what she had witnessed. Victoria consciously emerged from behind the tree that had served as her makeshift hiding place and walked directly and openly toward them with a facial expression that made it absolutely clear that she was visibly and deeply moved by what she had observed, but in a completely positive and appreciative way. Both Alberto and Esperanza were obviously surprised by her unexpected appearance, but the genuine expression of positive emotion and gratitude on Victoria's face immediately made it clear that she wasn't unhappy, irritated, or worried about what she had discovered. "Albert," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I saw and heard you two talking. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping or trying to interfere. But what you just did for Esperanza, the way you treat and speak to her, it's more valuable and effective than any expensive treatment I've ever paid for, or any specialized therapy she's ever received." Albert visibly shifted, uncomfortable and unsure how to appropriately interpret his employer's reaction to a situation that could be construed as exceeding his official duties. "Mrs. Victoria, I sincerely hope there's no problem with the walks or—" "No, Victoria," interrupted gently but firmly. "There's no problem whatsoever with what you were doing. There's only profound gratitude and genuine recognition that you accomplished something I didn't know how to achieve, something all the specialists I hired failed to accomplish." Esperanza, who had remained silent during this initial exchange, suddenly focused her attention on Victoria with a mental clarity and emotional presence she hadn't displayed in months of previous interactions. "Victoria, my dear heart-daughter," she said, her voice clear and affectionate, "you finally met my dear friend Albert. He helps me remember and celebrate who I truly am inside, even when my mind sometimes gets confused and lost." The next 3 hours unfolded into the most meaningful, educational, and transformative conversation Victoria had had in years. Comfortably seated on the shaded veranda of the house with a relaxing view of the garden that had become the setting for so much healing and connection, Albert generously shared his personal philosophy on authentic care, developed through direct and often painful experience with his own father. explaining in detail how he had learned through trial and error that people living with dementia respond far more positively to active acknowledgement and celebration of their remaining capabilities and qualities than to constant focus on their increasing limitations or comparisons to lost abilities. Esperanza doesn't need to be completely cured to be happy, useful and valued, Albert explained with conviction born of experience. She primarily needs to be seen, heard, recognized, and valued consistently for who she still is today, not constantly lamented for who she used to be before the illness or treated as a diminished person. Victoria admitted with a painful but liberating honesty that she had become so intensely focused on trying to solve Esperanza's medical problem through financial resources and technical expertise that she had completely lost sight of the valuable and complete person who still existed within the limitations imposed by the neurological condition. I genuinely thought that demonstrating love and care meant hiring the best specialists available and providing the most advanced treatments money could buy. But you're offering something I didn't know how to give, and which is apparently equally important. You're consistently treating her as a complete, interesting and valuable person, Albert responded with a genuine humility that touched Victoria even more deeply. Mrs. Victoria, you gave Esperanza medical resources and specialized care that I could never offer, and which are absolutely essential to her physical health and safety. But perhaps we both have complementary pieces of the same complex puzzle. You expertly care for her body and medical needs. I merely try to care for her spirit and soul. Esperanza, demonstrating intermittent but significant moments of great mental clarity and verbal articulation during this transformative conversation, made a profound observation that would permanently change Victoria's perspective on wealth, value and success in life. Victoria, dear, you've always been so intelligent and talented with money, business, and professional achievements. But Albert taught me that there are different kinds of wealth that are equally important. There's material wealth that you earn through work and success, and there's spiritual wealth that you offer and receive through authentic human connections. Albert gives me the wealth of being seen, recognized, and treated as a complete and valuable person every day. From that transformative and revelatory Sunday onward, Victoria completely restructured not only her approach to Esperanza's care, but her own fundamental life priorities and her understanding of what constitutes true success and lasting personal satisfaction. She boldly renegotiated the terms of the international merger to include specific clauses that would allow her significantly greater personal flexibility and time for relationships, finally recognizing that professional success without meaningful human connection and authentic emotional presence was leaving her spiritually impoverished and emotionally empty, despite all her material wealth and public recognition. Albert was immediately promoted from domestic worker to specialized well-being coordinator, with specific responsibility and adequate resources to develop comprehensive activity programs that consistently honored Esperanza's current capabilities and continued interests instead of focusing exclusively on limitations or decline. Victoria also humbly requested that Albert personally train her on effective communication and interaction techniques that recognized and celebrated Esperanza's complete humanity, learning through practical instruction how to offer authentic presence and genuine emotional connection. More significantly still, Victoria established a substantial fund to develop a completely innovative care center that would combine high-quality medical resources with humanistic and holistic approaches that Albert had demonstrated to be as effective as purely technical treatments. The center would progressively become a national and later international model for the care of people living with dementia that simultaneously honored legitimate medical needs and equally important spiritual and emotional needs. Hope became, without ever planning or seeking such a role, an unintentional yet powerful inspiration for developing new approaches to care, approaches that recognized and implemented the fundamental principle that people living with dementia still possess valuable wisdom, unique and important perspectives, and a significant capacity to contribute positively to the lives of others in ways that are frequently underestimated or completely ignored by purely medical approaches. Victoria learned through this transformative experience that true wealth wasn't exclusively in what she could buy with money, but equally in what she could recognize, value, nurture, and celebrate in other people through genuine attention and authentic presence. Alberto had convincingly demonstrated that lived experience, genuine compassion, and empathetic understanding developed through personal challenges are often more valuable and effective than unlimited financial resources applied without emotional sensitivity or deep human understanding. The story of the expanded and redefined family that emerged from that revealing Sunday in the garden became a powerful and inspiring testament to how different forms of knowledge, experience, and care can complement each other harmoniously to create more holistic, effective, and humane approaches to complex challenges affecting millions of families around the world, demonstrating that truly effective solutions often require a combination of technical resources with practical wisdom and authentic human connection. Years later, when Victoria regularly reflected on the transformative moment she heard Alberto conversing with Hope in the backyard garden, she consistently recognized that those tears that had streamed down her face had marked far more than simply a moment of passing emotion. They had represented the beginning of her own foundational education about forms of wealth that don't appear in financial reports or corporate balance sheets, but that enrich life in profound and lasting ways that money alone, no matter how abundant, could never achieve or replace. The therapeutic walks in the garden continued to be a central and essential part of Hope's daily life, but gradually expanded to include Victoria regularly, and eventually other families in the community facing similar situations and comparable challenges. They collectively discovered that genuine conversations, unconditional and consistent respect, and the active recognition of complete human dignity were powerful and effective medicines, perfectly complementing traditional medical treatments, creating integrated approaches that honored both the physical and emotional and spiritual needs of the people they loved.